A hostile reception for the Prime Minister when he visited Southport yesterday afternoon as he sought to lay flowers. We'll bring you all of that. And that was followed by a far-right protest outside a mosque in Southport, which descended into rioting last night. Roughly an hour after thousands had gathered for a vigil to remember the girls of the Holiday Club dancing outrage across the other side of town. It is a very complex story. LBC's reporter Liam Gotting joins me now from Southport. Liam.
Well, Nick, what started as an evening calling for peace and unity at the vigil for those three girls that have died turned into a night of violence and unrest with clashes between protesters and the police. Hundreds took to the streets, initially gathering outside a local mosque just 2 minutes away from the scene of the knife attack. We're told police stepped in when the crowd began throwing things at the mosque, and before long, bricks, wheelie bins and bottles were being thrown and a police van was on fire. Now, this all followed a day of high emotions and tension which could be felt during the visit of the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. He was heckled and shouted at as he lay flowers by the police cordon.
How many more children have died in our streets, Prime Minister? How many more children? Are we going to do something? You've got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change! Our children! Go away!
Found out my friend's 9-year-old daughter was killed.
You're not wanted!
The person I've held as a child, and you can't do shit.
Come here, sweetheart. Come here.
He can't do shit. Let him be the Prime Minister.
Now, Nick, Merseyside police claim that the people involved in this protest were supporters of the English Defence League, the EDL. There's certainly lots of talk that these people, or that a large amount of them, were not from Southport. We've spoken to a local taxi driver this morning who's told us that he knows his colleagues were taking a lot of people out of town after the protests had calmed. He suggested that many were from elsewhere and had travelled to be part of this protest, which left 39 police officers injured. 29 of those were hospitalised. Here's what it sounded like last night.
Run! You brought the plague! Run! You brought the plague! Run! I've got some decent stuff, actually.
This morning, Nick, the after effects of last night can be seen everywhere. There's rubble, debris all over the streets. There's broken bricks, glass, people's fences and walls have been broken. There's melted wheelie bins which had been set on fire, and the road is charred black as well from the fires. We spoke to these people this morning who've witnessed all the events last night.
We started throwing stuff already. That's when she thought something's wrong, and she turned around and got back home. Stayed with the neighbour, like I'm just outside the drive. Literally a crowd of people just come up and started throwing bricks and all sorts into the mosque. It's like a horror film. It's like a zombie apocalypse film, honestly. Unbelievable. There was no need for that at all. It doesn't represent Southport or anything like that. It's just ridiculous.
It's terrifying. You know, you just wonder what's happening in the world, really, when you see something like this after, you know, already what we've had this week. To see this unfold yesterday is just, I can't actually believe it. You know, there's no words really to describe it.
Well, as I say, Nick, a real tale of two halves last night, starting with that vigil, which was peaceful, calling for the people of Southport to unite and come together, but ending in rioting and protesting, and Merseyside police officers being injured at the scene.
Liam Gotting reporting from Southport. Let's bring into the conversation David Spencer, who's Head of Crime and Justice at the Policy Exchange and serves as a DCI, Detective Chief Inspector with the Metropolitan Police, and joins me now. Mr. Spencer, Southport has a toxic mix at the moment. There's absolute horror and mourning, and there's anger as well. How is the situation to be diffused? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, I should say, as well as being the Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange, I'm a former, not a serving Detective Chief Inspector. But
I'm sorry, are you still in the job? I do apologise.
That's all right.
You've come away from the yard.
Indeed. Well, no one can look at the scenes last night and not be absolutely horrified with what happened. And first and foremost, you know, I'm thinking about the officers that were injured last night.
Yes.
quite clearly, those responsible for last night's violence need to be identified, prosecuted, and sent to prison for lengthy prison terms. The sort of things that we saw last night are utterly unacceptable, and the criminal justice system needs to deal with them. So that's the first and foremost thing that needs to happen. I think, secondly, we must not forget that at the heart of this are the families of 3 little girls who have tragically been killed, and of course, others that are still in hospital, injured, and of course, community of Southport. So what needs to happen is that we need to rally round as a nation and be there to look after this community and do everything we possibly can to support them. And scenes like last night help no one.
But when the elected head of the nation arrives, he's heckled. I don't know that they want us rallying round at this time, Mr. Spencer. We sent the P up and we sent the P up and he got shouted at.
Well, I'm not convinced that all of those that were shouting were necessarily from Southport. I've got friends local there that, and some of them certainly didn't sound like it, but others will know better than me. I'm sure others were just expressing their very, very raw grief in this situation. I think, of course, there's what's going on right now, but then also there are the policy questions that come from this, not least, of course, the fact that we have a national crisis on knife crime. We know that, for example, over the last decade, stabbings and other knife crime have gone up from about 26,000 a year to 50,000 a year in the last 10 years. So we have a very real series of policy questions which will come out from this, not least of all, how the government is going to deal with stabbings and knife crime, which have absolutely gone through the roof in the last decade.
One other question, which we're going to explore later in the show, Mr. Spencer, is that somehow, and it's not the fault of the police or the authorities, but they're restricted now by laws that date back in some places some 4 decades as regards the identification of suspects. Those laws were drafted before social media was even thought of. And now, as we witnessed yesterday, we have stories where, unfortunately, the truth hasn't got its boots on before a lie is halfway around the world. How is that to be countered?
And there's real challenges here. And I'm not convinced that we should be making huge swinging change or swathes of change to the system which exists at the moment, certainly as it pertains to people who are arrested and suspects. We should remember that the person that's in custody at the moment, as far as I'm aware, has not even been charged yet. Now, of course, that may well come in the coming days and coming hours, but certainly I think we would want to be very, very cautious before we change the law to have people who are still in custody suspected, not even charged with a criminal offence, before we started naming them in the public.
Grateful for your time. David Spencer, thank you. You're Head of Crime and Justice at the Policy Exchange, and you were a DCI, Detective Chief Inspector in the Metropolitan Police until 2016. Thank you for your time this morning. If you'd been there yesterday at Southport, and the Prime Minister had come by with flowers with all the correct intention, it is right that he should go, let's face it, what would you have called out to the PM? What of this suggestion that they weren't all local people? And this is a key aspect that we're going to discuss. Maybe we'll get to this because the initial reaction is to the fact how it can tip over. But within an hour or two, a town that had held a vigil for 3 slaughtered young schoolgirls was effectively the scene of a mini riot. No, take the word mini out. Was the scene of a riot in which nearly 40 officers and 3 police dogs were caught up in the violence, and they set a mosque alight. How is that to be, to use the expression again, diffused?